Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to Talking with Teachers. I'm your host, Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. Our guest today is Shaykh Joe Bradford. Shaykh Joe Bradford is a graduate from the University of Medina, or the Islamic University of Medina. He is a certified Sharia advisor and auditor, accredited by the Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions. He's currently pursuing a PhD at the International Islamic University of Malaysia with a focus on financial injustice. He's an entrepreneur, an American scholar of Islam. He previously worked as VP and senior Sharia consultant for Al-Rajihi Bank, which is the largest Islamic bank in the Middle East. And if I recall correctly, the very first time the two of us met actually was here at my home. I had never met him before, but he was visiting the area in California. Someone told me that, okay, the Sheikh Joe Bradford is looking forward to meeting you. And, so I had him come over and we got to know one another, and we've been in contact on and off since then. We'd like to bring to the screen Sheikh Joe Bradford. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yes, that's correct. We did, I think the first face-to-face was at your home.
Yeah, mashallah. That's a great way to meet, face to face. Typically people meet online or on telephone call, things like that. But alhamdulillah,
Yeah,
the good old
mashallah.
fashioned way of doing things, right?
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
Inshallah. Yeah, really do appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, Sheikh, and really want to actually introduce the audience to you. I mean, of course, people know many of us through our Islamic activities, and I like to give people a little bit more insight into people's background and to hopefully appreciate them more. So while I'm trying to sort of get information for the public, I'm also sort of trying to gather information for myself, because I learned quite a bit through these interviews. And there's a lot of archival material that's developed through this, and I really do appreciate you giving us the opportunity to do this and include you.
Absolutely.
So how was it? I mean, how was it, growing up? What's your journey like? How did you end up where you are right now today?
Growing up, it's interesting you mentioned that, because if there's I think popularly, because I've been in Texas so long, people are like, "Oh, white guy in Texas, like he's a true-blooded Texan," and I'm not a Texan at all, actually. I'm
Okay.
adopted, but I
Mm.
was born in Detroit, Michigan,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, and Jacksonville, Florida. And
Mm.
I only came to Texas much later. Um,
Mm.
but growing up was, I mean, my father worked for Ford Motor Company, right? I was there in Detroit until I was about 8 years old, and then later moved down to Charleston, South Carolina. Stayed there for about three and a half, 4 years, and then the rest of my adolescence and teenage years was in Jacksonville, Florida. So I would say I grew up a middle class, lower middle class, kind of typical, American family.
Mhm.
Um, I don't have a like a transformative, transformation narrative for people,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
down and out, you know, life of high society or life of high crime and then become a
Mhm.
Muslim.
Yeah.
I was very, very much just kind of middle of the way.
Yeah, mashallah. You mentioned your father. Of course, I'm assuming there's a mother there, of course, in the picture as well. You did mention that you were adopted. Um, how?
Adopted? No, no, I'm not adopted. No.
Oh, I thought that's what you told me. I thought you said you were adopted. You said something. It sounded like you said you were adopted. I'm
Oh
glad I
no.
asked you again. Right?
No, I'm an adopted Texan, meaning
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. That's what it
yeah,
was.
yeah, yeah.
Adopted
Not
Texan.
not
I
ad-
didn't hear
not,
it.
not adopted. No.
So the
It's funny though.
qualifier, right? Okay.
After I accepted Islam, people used to ask my mother if I was adopted. She's like, "Well, how is your son Muslim if he's not adopted?" She's like, "Religion and bloodline, completely two different things."
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm assuming that you guys were like Christians, Protestant, Catholics, or yeah.
Yeah. So my father comes from a traditionally Southern Baptist household,
Mhm.
and my mother is from a Presbyterian background.
Mm.
But in no way, shape, or form religious.
Okay.
Um,
Mhm.
I mean, religious in the sense that we had a Bible in the house, right?
Mhm.
I think having a family Bible is I really wonder how much of a tradition it is amongst Americans. But like when I was growing up, every family had a Bible, and that Bible was not only just there for like religious reading, but it was a record of the family as well. So we had one where it recorded like the marriages, the divorces, the births,
Mm.
the deaths, all of that was in the Bible. I
Mm.
have no idea where that is now.
Mhm.
But that we had that. We were a family of readers, so we had lots of books. But not particularly religious. I mean, I joke with people sometimes. My parents were the kind to say that, like, this Easter we're going to church, and then you wake up late, and then what happened to church? Just eat your pancakes. It's, we're not going.
Okay. Yeah. So, how far back does your family go in America? I mean, do you have any knowledge of that? Because you said that you had dates inside your Bible. How far
Yeah.
back you guys can you trace it?
I mean, right back to the founding. Right back to the
Okay.
founding.
Hmm.
So it's interesting because there is amongst Americans sometimes a tendency to overshoot or like overestimate or overexpress like what your family is. Like
Hmm.
e- you know e- everybody somehow is like related to a former president,
Mm.
or has Cherokee blood, or, something like that. People always want to like embellish. um and it's interesting, after researching, like academically, like diligently researching this stuff, a lot of the things that we were told growing up about who we're related to or where we're from were turned out to just be kind of like misunderstandings on the part of
Mm.
family members. Like at one time we were told that we were related somehow to like Samuel Adams.
Mm.
And uh and then what I found out, it was somebody whose name was like Samuel Adams Bradford. Like he's like named after him, but not him.
Okay. Okay.
But the Bradford family, our side of the Bradford family, the Bradfords chiefly came over at the beginning of the English colonies to Plymouth in Massachusetts,
Mhm.
as well as Jamestown colony in Virginia. And so we're from the Jamestown Bradfords.
Okay.
So we had there had because William Bradford was the original governor of Plymouth, and so there was like an assumption because of the fame that maybe we're from there. But I actually contacted the Mayflower Society,
Hmm.
and I said,
Oh,
"Hey,
nice.
this is what I know about my family tree up to this area of Virginia." Um, and they said, "Yeah, there's a gap in your family tree there. We know that people are connected. We just don't know how many people between them, because an area of Virginia was actually like flooded, and the small town where part of my family used to live, like all of the records are flooded. They're making some kind of like reservoir. Um, but if you mention X, Y, these people, then these people are not Mayflower Bradfords; they're Jamestown Bradfords. So you need to
Mm.
contact them." So yeah, so very early on, but that gave me a lead to kind of go back and see where in England, where beyond that it was. So yeah, very old family. So basically Virginia, from Virginia down through Tennessee to Kentucky, down into Alabama. That's where my father was born. And then my father, as a very small child, moved to Detroit with his parents. And my grandfather started working for the Ford Motor Company as well. And then I was born in Detroit.
Hmm. Mashallah. Mashallah. Yeah, this beautiful story. I mean, so you guys are English.
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much.
Okay, okay. So you keep any have any connections back there to the original homeland, or I mean, any relatives still there that you have any
Not
contact
n
with?
No, no, not at all, not at all. I don't think even some of the brothers asked me like, "Hey, you gonna come back and, come to England," and things like that, and, I said, "Yeah, I'll come on the DL and explore," but, I've never been there actually. I've never even gone through the UK in transit, and really have no connections back there, other than kind of namesake.
Hmm. Right. So I'm assuming you're one of the only people in your family who happens to be Muslim, and and then of course conversions. I imagine, of course, there's a conversion how old were you when you first converted to Islam, and then what led you to want to study deeper?
Yeah, so I was 14 when I first read about Islam.
Mm, mhm,
Read about it in a magazine article. So this is, the age before the internet, just to give everyone context. And then I started reading on and off for about a year, just kind of like reading books of comparative religion and trying to find whatever I could. It was information was kind of sparse at that time.
mhm,
And then finally, in the beginning of my 10th grade year, I found a couple of books that were really well written. One by Ken Morgan of UNC Chapel Hill. He had commissioned a number of monographs. It's funny. The book was written, I think, in 1955, and he did what no other, Western academic had done at that time, and that was ask people of their faith to write about their faith.
mm,
Ask scholars of their faith to write about their faith. So before
right.
that, it was basically people of Jewish or Christian persuasion writing about Eastern religions or non-Judeo-Christian religions. And he said, no, I want scholars of Muslims to write about Muslims, scholars of Hindus to write about Hindus, scholars of Buddhists to write about Buddhists, So this volume had a couple of articles, one from Dr. Muhammad Hamidullah,
Yes.
the famous scholar that was in France for a while,
Mhm,
coincidentally passed away in Jacksonville, Florida.
mm,
His grave is there in Jacksonville, Florida. He has family there, and he came in his old age to seek treatment and passed away there.
mhm,
Um, Mahmoud Shaltut, Sheikh of Azhar at that time,
yes.
very influential article that he wrote. That was the one that I think convinced me about
Mm,
Islam.
mhm,
Um, Muhammad Darraz, also of Al
mm,
Azhar.
mm.
And a number of other notables that were in there. And the book is still in print, right? You can find it reprinted. But I
So
read
this
that
is
and I was
this is
kind of
all
like,
in the 10th grade. You're all in the 10th grade and you're reading all
yeah,
these articles, right? So
yeah, it's all in the
okay,
10th grade. Yeah, it's all in
okay.
the 10th grade. Yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah, and then waited for my 15th birthday and then showed up one Sunday at the mosque. Yeah.
oh, mashallah. I mean, so you never really struggled with like the belief in God. It was like more what would you say you were looking for, right? I would imagine, what's that you were hungry for something at the time.
Yeah, I
Mm,
would never say that. I don't think I've ever struggled with the belief in God. I think
mm,
I was looking for clarity about that belief. So
okay.
so Christianity, I used to go to church,
Mhm,
and the Trinity was not a clear belief to me. And when
mhm,
I would ask for clarity about it from the pastor or the minister or whomever, I would just be told things like, well, the mind is a bottleneck. You can't put a watermelon through a Coke bottle. You got this big idea, you're trying to put it through your small
mm,
mind. You just have to have blind faith. And that never really appealed to me, because um if Corinthians says God is not the author of confusion, if I believe it's Corinthians says God is not the author of confusion, why am I confused?
mhm,
And I never would really get a satisfying answer, so I would go to another church. So like
mhm,
I personally was baptized in a Southern Baptist church.
mhm,
And then after that, I ended up going to a number of other different denominations, kind of looking for answers, which I never really got.
mhm. So okay, so you're 15, you become Muslim. I mean, how did the community treat you? I mean, how did you felt welcomed? It was at some point I imagine you felt okay. Well, maybe either you're getting conflicting messages between different community members. You say, I need to study this on my own, or I don't know. I'm just assuming.
Mm.
How did that all go? Right.
Well, I think it was a few elder community members admitted to me years later that they were simultaneously like ecstatic and scared, because
Mm,
I was the very first like American to come to the mosque and accept Islam below the age of 18.
mm, mhm,
And so they were very happy, like, oh, this guy's accepting Islam young, but also very worried, like, we don't know legally what we're allowed to do. Like, do we
okay.
need to
Okay.
just send him home and tell him no?
Mhm,
What do we do? Do we and when I think back on certain treatment from the community now, taking that into mind, it makes sense now why some people were apprehensive in dealing with me, because they
mhm.
themselves just didn't know, like, hey, I'm dealing with a minor.
Right.
Like, can I take this minor in my car and drop him at home,
Mhm,
and his parents don't know who I am? That's going to be a problem, right? So I really understand now. Then it was kind of like very Jacksonville had a very ecumenical and very diverse community.
Mhm,
Um, so I was meeting people from all over the world.
mhm,
Um, people that were, Jacksonville natives that were Muslim. Um, and so there was I think a general sense of welcoming, and I would say that I was very welcome to the point that even my own family admitted to that later on. They said, "Yeah, you were his family at times when we were unable to be." They were
mhm.
very appreciative of the Muslim community,
Alhamdulillah.
uh,
Mhm,
and ha- and and I think the welcoming nature of the community um, is really what changed my parents' mindset towards Islam,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
Because nobody was telling me disrespect your parents, don't listen to your parents. If I complained about my parents telling me to do homework, not come to the mosque, it was you need to do your homework, and then you come when they tell you to. You
mhm,
know, so my I think the community, by sticking to their true Islamic values, right, of respect for parents is right after worship of Allah. I think or were able to inculcate into me something that changed my viewpoint and my attitude as kind
mhm.
of like, opinionated American teenager. I don't have to listen to what mom and dad say and that kind of thing.
Mhm,
And that had a positive effect for me, I think, for the rest of my life. And for my parents as well, with just understanding what Islam's about.
mm. I mean, did you get, any resistance from your parents when you told them that you had converted?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
absolutely.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, they were not sure of what it was.
Mhm,
Um, I would say my mother was not as familiar with Islam. My stepfather, um, who was in the Navy, um, he uh, he was very familiar with Muslims, and in fact, admitted to me a couple, like years later, that he was actually in high school with some Muslims. So it wasn't
mm,
anything weird.
okay.
But for him in the beginning, it was, well, you're not 18, so you don't get to choose what your religion is. You
Mm.
know, um, but I did it anyway because I was, hard-headed
Rebellious,
American
right.
kid.
Yeah, yeah. Were there other young white Muslim converts or just other white Muslims in the masjid, in Jacksonville at the time?
I mean, the year that I accepted Islam,
Mm,
there was only one other. He was a brother in his 30s, I want to say.
mhm,
He married a sister from East Africa. They were living on the polar opposite side of town.
mhm,
And he and his wife and his two small children would come to the mosque occasionally, so I'd get to, like, connect with him.
mhm.
Um, but we didn't really find like a lot of affinity, I think, because
Okay,
of the age
right.
difference and stuff like that.
Mhm,
But there were a lot of African American kids whose parents were in the Sunday school or were teachers in the Sunday school. We
mhm,
all kind of grew up together, and so I was
mm.
able to
Okay.
connect with them.
Mm,
Um, a year, I'd say 2 years after I accepted Islam, and then a year after that, there were 2 other white Americans that became Muslim, to the point that at times people confuse my story for them, even in Jacksonville.
mm.
They're like, "So, Joe, tell me about when you had some trouble with the law as a kid." And I'm like, "I never had any trouble with the law as a kid." "No, no, brother, I remember you as a kid. I remember you." "No, you're thinking about so and
Right.
so." "No, no, it was you, definitely. No, there were 3 of us. I knew we all look alike, but we're not that similar. One of them is taller, one of them is shorter than me, so I'm right in the
Right.
middle." Um,
Mm.
but yeah, I mean, it was certainly not the norm, right? To the point where if any
Mm.
white person came to the mosque, everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, is that your uncle? Is that your dad? Is that your brother?" I'm like, "No, not all of us are related, right? This is just
Yeah,
a
right,
random
right,
guy that came
right.
to the masjid."
Yeah, yeah. Yes, alhamdulillah, sound like you had a pretty good, transition, like, into the community, and, I'm thinking about, what things could have possibly been like if you had converted in somewhere like Philadelphia, right?
Yeah, I can't comment on that. I mean, we had very low mosque attendance
Mhm.
outside of Jummah and Sunday school, and there is a brother, may Allah have mercy on him. He's passed
Amen.
now. African
Amen.
American brother. He was a
Mm,
journeyman electrician by the name of
mhm.
Musaddiq,
Mashallah.
and
Mm,
he met me. I skipped school one Friday. I came for Jummah, And I skipped school. Yes, it was against the rules. My teacher, however, knew, and he actually would allow me. He was like, "I'm not going to give you, like, as long as your grades are up, you're allowed a certain number of absences in the semester, so I'm not going to hold it against you."
Mhm.
Um, so that was a good thing of like being encouraged to be better in my academics actually allowed me to be able to come to Jumu'ah without consequences because I could literally
Mhm.
just like cut out of school and walk over to the masjid. My high school is that
Mm.
close. So this brother in Musaddiq, Allah yarhamu,
Amen.
he saw me and he's like, he saw me praying one time. And I did like 3 rukus and like 5 sajdas and, like didn't stand, didn't sit it in between the sajda or something like that.
Mm.
And he calls me, he's come over, come here. Where'd you learn to pray? And I said, I'm just learning here. And he goes, brother, you do not know how to pray correctly. These people are going to be nice to you, but I'm not going to be. This is the law. I'm not gonna,
صراحة.
mince words. So he actually took
Mm.
me and he went to
Mm.
the imam at that time,
Mm.
who was Dr. Zulfiqar Ali Shah, by the way. You know
MashaAllah.
him.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Yeah.
So Dr.
Mm.
Zulfiqar was the
Mhm.
new imam at that time. He was like brand new in the US.
Okay. Mhm.
And Brother Musaddiq went to him and he said, this young man needs to learn, and I'm coming here to learn, and you're the imam of this community. I'm going to hold you responsible in front of Allah if we're not educated and taught.
Mm.
And so, that's when there was kind of like, okay, you need to start coming to Sunday school, and then we're going to do like a special thing for converts on Friday nights.
Mhm.
And so sometimes it would be me and Musaddiq and the imam. Sometimes the imam wouldn't come and another Egyptian brother would come. And then there were these brothers who would just kind of pop in for salah. And one of them, by the name of Abu Malik, I remember him. He was the most frequent Palestinian brother.
Mhm.
And he said, subhanallah, you guys like don't even know how to lead yourselves in prayer, and you're here at the masjid. Like, we've learned so much. We're not coming. So he went back to people and he was like riling them up, like you guys need to be back to the house of Allah.
Mhm.
And he brought like 15 guys with him.
Mm.
And so we just all of a sudden had this vibrant group of people of different backgrounds and calling their friends and stuff like that. And we would just make Friday would become like the hangout night at the
Mm.
masjid. We'd
Mhm.
get together for Maghrib, Isha, read some Quran, read some Hadith together. Um, and I still have fond memories. There's some other convert brothers that came along at that time too. And kind of the innocent reactions you get to people reading things in the Sirah and the Sunnah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so we they kind of took me in as their little brother, and it was great. That's where I credit learning Arabic too,
Mm.
sitting with those guys because they would want to speak in Arabic, but they were respectful and they would translate for me until it got to a point they were like, you know what, you're gonna learn like our kids, just be quiet and listen,
Mhm.
write things down. They gave me like a 9-year-old, 10-year-old kid to like translate for me, and like I would ask him the vocabulary. And that, in addition to the formal learning in the Sunday school, I think is what allowed me to learn Arabic before ever leaving the state of Florida, much less the United States.
MashaAllah. So eventually you go to Medina. And what year was that? And how old were you?
Yeah, I went to Medina in 1999.
Okay. Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Right.
I went to Medina in 1999, and I,
Like you're
I
in your
would
20s.
say I
You're in
was
your
about
20s by
20.
now, right?
Yeah, I was about
Yeah.
23, 24 at that time.
Uh-huh. Mhm.
Yeah, and that was after years of applying. But
I really.
the
Mhm.
application process at that time for pretty much any school in the
Mhm.
Middle East was,
Mhm.
abysmal, right? It was kind of like send your paperwork in and pray and
Mhm.
hope that you have somebody on the inside.
Right.
But alhamdulillah, I got in. I went in the fall of 1999, and I ended up staying there for my bachelor's, master's, and then I worked in the kingdom for several years. Continued study in some other universities and institutes as well,
Mhm.
and then eventually, came back to the States.
Right, right. So why Medina? Why not Azhar or somewhere else? You just found someone's advice, or you had a fascination with it for some reason, or what was it?
Well,
Mhm.
I applied to many different universities,
Okay.
and I applied to Al Azhar. I applied to Jamiat Al Bayt in
Mm.
Jordan.
Hmm.
Applied to Jamiat Dimashq.
Hmm.
I applied to uh, where was it? Somebody wanted to send my application to Islamabad,
Mhm.
So it was a combination of things. Um, One was the application process itself.
Mhm.
Number two was the financial support that was available. So,
Okay.
like going to an Azhar at that time, there was no financial support available.
You're right.
And in fact, they were asking for me to like provide financial information about my parents.
Oh, really?
And my
Mhm.
parents were like, absolutely not. We're not sending like our tax return or something to some university overseas. That's impossible.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then three was relative safety. So,
Mhm.
like my dad, because he was in the Navy, he said, there are certain countries I will not let you go to,
Mhm.
and there are certain countries where I have no problem, right? So he was like a no on Syria, right?
Mhm.
No on Pakistan, right?
Mhm.
He said Egypt, yes, but you might not, the amenities might be wanting. You
Right.
can go in the Gulf, but the Gulf is going to be really hot,
Mhm.
and the amenities might be wanting, but you'll uh, you know most of the GCC is an American ally, so not a problem. Jordan, not a problem.
Mhm.
So in reality, I think what sealed the deal was the fact that Medina used to send over delegations every year, and they would do like a week or a 2 week dawra ilmiya, like a knowledge
Mhm.
intensive.
Mhm.
And if you could make it to that and attend, you could usually get an interview.
Mhm.
And so that's what I did. So
Oh, okay. Okay.
so I attended one.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
got the interview after it, and then yeah, told them, hey, I've been applying for years. This is what's
Mhm.
happened. I have no idea what happened to my paperwork.
Mhm.
And it's funny, when I got into the university and got over there, and I went to the admissions office, they said, "Oh, just a minute." They came out and gave me like the stacks of paperwork that they had
Mhm.
found, like when cleaning out the office or something like that. So
Yeah. So, how did you develop the interest in finance, and how did it happen that you were working with a bank?
yeah, I mean, I was like in middle school, high school, I was like, um, I'd take like economics as an elective. I would participate in like the stock market game, which was like a whole Florida school system thing
Hmm.
where you do it individually, or you could create teams and compete. So like we came in one year, we came in like second to Palm Beach, and our teacher was like, "Well, you came in second, but you guys are really first because all those guys, their dads are like portfolio managers, so they obviously coach them." But we would have to. I was always interested in business entrepreneurship.
Hmm.
It was a general interest. So when I became Muslim, it was like, oh, that's fascinating that Islam is comprehensive enough to encompass this. And then in 1997, I want to say, um, you know, you probably remember this, where a lot of mosques, if they wanted to have a lecture, right? There was no like what we're doing right now, right?
Yeah.
You had to pay like $1,500 to AT&T, get an international conference calling number, send,
Mm.
fax a list of questions to a sheikh overseas, and then 15 different masjids, each who had put in $100,
Mhm.
would dial in to listen, and then
Right.
translate the answering of the questions and the lecture over the
Right.
conference call number, and you just hope
Mhm.
that you didn't get disconnected.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
So
Mhm.
there was a scholar, and he was a very prominent scholar of Islamic finance, who they had sent a very long list of questions to. And I just remember the frustration of some of the attendees afterwards, because like everything was haram. Like he's just like haram, haram. Like, what about this haram? What about that haram? What about this haram?
Hmm.
And subhanallah, there was one brother who, subhanallah, I see him even till today, you know. And he would say, I'm a simple guy. Like, I install cable for a living. Like, what I if Child Protective Services found out how many children I have in an apartment, I'm gonna be in trouble.
Hmm.
And I want to buy a house, but I don't want to do haram. What's the solution for me? Like, where's the halal? And that was the thing that kind of like piqued my interest to actually pursue this line of study formally.
Mm.
Because I said to myself, if the first verse of the Quran is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim,
Right.
and everything is predicated on mercy, well, where's the mercy in saying that everything is haram and not leaving any solutions?
Mm.
Maybe there are solutions out there that people just haven't discovered. Maybe they haven't researched. Let me try and be part of that. And that's kind of how I got into it. So when I got over to Medina, I started to connect with specialists in the field, asking my teachers, and it was still very nascent. It was still very, at least in Medina, where we were very traditionally geared. Um, so I actually would travel to like Qasim and Riyadh, which were more mercantile and business centers,
Mhm.
and connect with scholars there as well,
Mm.
Jeddah as well, and just try to find out what's the state of research, what's the state of the industry, and connect with people. And that's how I got started.
Mm. Mm. SubhanAllah. That's great. That's great. Yeah. And then, what year did you were you hired for Rajahi Bank? You were, yeah.
Yeah, so at Rajahi Bank, I started work in, I want to say 2007, 2008, and I worked for them for about 3.5 years. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I worked
Okay.
I worked at the bank, under the what they call Amanat al-Hay'a Shar'iyya, so
Hmm.
the Sharia board secretariat, right? Which
Hmm.
essentially is the advisory arm. And then there's an audit and compliance arm as well, which kind
Hmm.
of applies the rules and checks up on them. And our area, we would do the research and present new issues to the Sharia board. And so the head of the Sharia board at that time was Sheikh Abdullah ibn Aqil, who was Sheikh al-Hanabila at that time,
Hmm.
and he was close to 100 years old at that time. But still, subhanallah, very, very, very spry, very aware, very alert. I used to read to him at his home as well. Um,
Hmm.
but it was, you know, a blessing to be kind of under his tutelage and the tutelage of the other scholars that were on the Sharia board at that time. And I learned a lot. I think there's, one thing that one of my teachers in Medina, Sheikh Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Mukhtar al-Shinqiti, he used to stress was that
Hmm.
scholars who are actively working in a field will pass on insights that you won't find from others. So he said, look,
Exactly. Hmm.
like
Hmm.
look at Al-Imam al-Mawardi's book Al-Hawi, right?
Hmm.
So Al-Hawi is special because Al-Mawardi was an actual practicing judge.
Hmm.
So he was living the law, and then when he was writing his book, like including that lived law and the possibilities that would come up from
Hmm.
issues. Whereas, as more probably more acquainted with than even I, that many times the issues that are happening in the courts, they don't kind of they don't get included into the
Yeah.
codified books of fiqh until
Right.
later, after they've gone through being
Hmm.
in the books of fatwa, you know being adopted by scholars of the madhab,
Hmm.
broadly, then universally, then being included as furu' or
Right.
awjuh or ihtimalat or whatever.
Hmm. Hmm.
But like al-Mawardi kind of yaqfiz, he just kind of jumps all of that because he's practicing in the field, and he's a active scholar in the field as well.
Yeah. Right. 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 SubhanAllah. Great point. Great point. I mean, do you identify as a Hanbali?
I do, yes, yes.
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
because it seems like Humblies are in short supply these days, or at least they're not at least not openly representing themselves or presenting themselves as Hanabila. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, I started off learning the Hanafi school.
Hmm.
So I learned the basics of Hanafi fiqh with Dr. Zulfiqar, as well as with Dr. Qudratullah Mujaddidi from
Hmm.
Afghanistan.
Hmm.
He was one of our Sunday school teachers.
Hmm.
Another teacher we had at that time was Dr. Farouk Tuleymat from Syria. Um, and I actually just saw Dr. Zulfiqar recently, and he was asked by one of the Hanafi scholars in this meeting. He said, "I'm trying to get a handle on your fiqh orientation." And he said, I'm 95% Hanafi, but I'm 5%, other madhahib. So when I was asked to introduce myself, I said, me, because of the majority of my study, I'm 95% Hanbali, but I'm 5% for Dr. Al-Fuqar, right? I'm Hanafi.
That's a good one.
So
Yeah,
um,
so
so
that's
yeah,
it.
so I was very fortunate to study to study the
Mhm.
madhab with a number
Mhm.
of different scholars, and I think I'm very grateful
Mhm.
to have as well. In that, in my estimation, the Hanbali madhab is one of the more expansive in its furor directly from the imam, and that lends to it a certain flexibility that people generally don't associate with the Hanbali school.
Right. Mhm. Mhm.
But if you look
Mhm.
in things like in um, in muamalat,
Mhm.
particularly, and even dealing with people of other faiths, in a number of social issues, you'll find that the Hanabila are perhaps um, more elastic than what other schools may have official positions.
Mhm.
Although, as you know as well as I do, most of these opinions, it's not like you can find something that's from the even the mufradat, the singular opinions of the Hanbali school
Mhm.
from the Imam.
Right.
It was picked up and adopted by some major scholar of some other school at another time and
Mhm.
kind of codified into the school using its usul. So I tend to tell people, like, don't think of the madhahib as competing, you
Right.
know, but
Mhm.
they have nuanced variances on the same opinions.
Right. Yeah. Well, I usually the short answer I usually give to people when they ask me the question of what is a school of law, what is a madhab itself, and I just say that well, they're just a certain interpretation of Quran and Sunnah.
Mm,
Right, so like the
right.
Hanafi school is in some sense you can think of it as Abu Hanifa's interpretation of Quran and Sunnah, and the Hanbali school, Imam Ahmad's interpretation of Quran and Sunnah, and that of the Shafi'i, the Malik, and etc. Right, so
Yes.
and I think that that's probably I think is accurate to describe it that way. Of course, we know
Yeah.
that there's a history and there's evolution, and a lot of things are added to the school which don't originate with the founders,
Hmm.
but or the eponyms themselves, because it's not necessarily that they founded a school; they didn't see themselves as founding a school, but it's
Hmm.
just that people adopted their opinions and normalized them. So yeah, yeah. So that's typically what I usually say when people ask that question.
Yeah. I'll many times tell people
Mhm.
it's the ladder that you climb to get to a higher understanding of the Quran and Sunnah.
Mhm.
It's not like a replacement for them,
Yes.
nor is it foreign to them.
Yes.
It's an
Mhm.
implement, and that's why there should be really no, like,
Mhm.
I don't really like the cliquishness that some people have, and
Yes.
a lot of times I tell people, that when I see them becoming like really overly um, fervent or
Mhm.
obsessive
Mhm.
about their
Zealous,
their zealotry around their affiliations.
fanatical, yeah,
Like,
fanatical. Yeah.
sometimes,
Mhm.
like, you don't need a sheikh and a madhab, like you need a hobby and a friend, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
some people,
Yeah.
it
Mhm.
becomes an extension of maybe
Mhm.
some jahili issues that they had
Mhm.
before Islam,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
it becomes an easy way to
Mhm.
to not modify behavior, but to
Mhm.
appear righteous, and
Yeah.
that's very troubling.
Yeah. I remember there was a brother some years ago who he left Islam and
Mm.
then he came back. And when I asked him, like, okay, what happened? What happened that made you come back? And he said to me, I got a regular job. And I
Really?
was like, well, what do you mean you got a regular job? I just started to listen to all the non-Muslims and the way that they were talking and the anxieties and the concerns that they had. And I just felt that, okay, they were just so miserable, right? And I just
Mm.
didn't want to be like that. So he said, I just got a regular job, and that's just solved my problems, and it's brought me back.
Subhanallah.
So
Subhanallah.
yeah, subhanallah. Yeah, subhanallah. There's so much there. I mean, do you have any? Of course, you've been working in the Islamic finance field for some time. Do you have any? And of course, I'm not trying to get you in trouble or anything like that, but did you feel that there's more to be done to make what we call Islamic finance a bit more Sharia compliant, quote unquote?
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
Mhm,
I
mhm,
think that the one of the missing
mhm,
um one of the missing components
mhm,
in the conversations about Islamic
mhm,
finance
mhm,
is really how integral the issues of political economy.
mhm. Yeah. Hmm.
are to the issues of finance. Because
Hmm.
if we're talking about, broad-based societal institutions, those institutions, while in our Western nomenclature about finance, we many times separate finance from value, and even economics from values. And we say that they're empirical sciences, they don't care about how you feel.
Hmm.
But in reality, policies reflect the values of the people that place them.
Right.
A very simple example of that is how predicated and preferred the use of debt, not even interest bearing debt,
Yes, it's debt.
but
Yeah.
just debt in and of itself
Mhm.
is integral to the U.S. economic
Yep. Hmm.
system or hegemony, if you want to say,
Hmm.
right? And so when somebody comes and says, I'm paying 5% interest on this loan from my local bank, and I'm not harming anyone and no one's harming me, how can that be haram?
Hmm.
Okay, but you're feeding into a system that as a system is facilitating for you a 5% interest rate because it's profiting a 25 to 35% interest rate off of developing and third world countries,
Hmm. Hmm.
through international finance. And so I think one of the faults of many people in the Islamic finance industry has been an unnecessary an unnecessary focus on the individual contract and contractual user, and not a focus on the overarching regulatory um, uh,
Hmm.
demands to inculcate Islamic values into this. So, like
Yes. Yes.
insurance,
Hmm.
right?
Yes. Hmm.
Is it allowed for me to get insurance? Is it not allowed?
Hmm.
All of most majority of the fatwa that I have come across
Hmm.
always talk about me as a policy holder getting a policy.
Right.
I
Hmm.
have yet to see anyone address what is stipulated for a company to issue policies,
Hmm.
right? Oh well,
Yeah.
they'll get into, well, it should be a mutual company, not a shareholder based conventional company.
Hmm.
Fine, but then what about the government that regulates insurance companies? What
Right.
should they be doing? And
Hmm.
so as we progress more, and I think there's some research that's being done about
Hmm.
this, right? We will need to get more into issues of like treasury management and central banking
Hmm.
and those foundational institutions
Yeah.
upon which all of this economic activity
Yeah.
is built. Because if we
Right.
don't,
Even just the nature of currency itself, right? I mean,
exactly,
well,
yeah,
yeah. So
even
yeah.
just the nature of currency
Hmm.
itself,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and because of the faults that we're finding in the current the current climate and the current system, right? I mean, even Western academics and specialists in monetary policy are starting to issue opinions that we should have full reserves instead of fractional reserves. we
Hmm.
should
Yes.
we should start moving our systems away from what we've been doing. So I
Yes.
think that the research challenge for Islamic finance is to get beyond consumer and retail concerns,
Hmm.
because I think pretty much most of that's been done, right? And it's going to be to really address the systemic issues.
Hmm.
And people are hesitant to do that sometimes simply because that means you have to address politics,
Yeah. Right.
and you have to speak truth to power in
Yes.
certain instances, and some people are not willing to do that.
Yeah. No, but it's totally necessary. I mean, it seems that we take a band-aid approach and we focus so much on
Yeah.
form as
Yes.
opposed to substance. And there's not much of a critique of the current system. And it also seems to me that a lot of Muslims who are working in the Islamic finance sector, um, I've come across people who, to me, don't seem to be very educated in basic Islamic teachings and fiqh,
Yes.
and they actually are, sort of teaching about Islamic finance, but they don't have a very, a foundational, a proper, solid foundation in Islamic, mu'amalat and
Yeah,
buyur, to
I would
begin
agree.
with, right?
I would say that there's
Yeah.
definitely people who have approached the industry as any kind of industry. You know,
Mhm.
if you learn the functions and the playbook
Mhm.
of, you know, what it takes to create, you know, a
Mhm.
retail practice or a corporate practice or, you know, consultancy. You know, it's like Legos, right? You can just take
Mhm.
Legos and put them together in a couple of different things, but in the end of the day, they themselves will be mystified as to how am I doing anything different than conventional
Right.
finance.
Yeah, yeah. I know recently I think you had some workshop on life insurance policies, and I saw some people they were upset with you and they were attacking you. Apparently your fatwa was that it was okay, right? I mean, maybe I'm sort of
Mm.
simplifying your particular understanding, and but anyway, why don't you care to speak just a little bit about that? What that what your position is and why.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I think, you know, what you mentioned before is the Band-Aid approach.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm,
this very succinctly kind of
mhm,
addresses that.
mhm,
When you say life insurance, you know, the first reaction that I get from everyone is the scholars have said that life insurance is haram, right?
mhm,
Most of the fatwa that were issued about insurance are from 1977
mhm,
to 1979.
mhm,
And they were dealing with information, which much of it still holds true today, and I actually don't go against.
mhm, mhm,
But there was a lack of understanding of how issuing of policies worked,
mhm,
right? So I agree with the majority of scholars that the vast majority of scholars that you have to have musharakat, you know, you have to have what they call ta'awun, you know, mutual companies and not
mhm,
conventional companies. I
mhm,
don't believe in the permissibility of conventional insurance companies.
mhm,
And when you have a mutual company, that mutual company has to invest in those things which are permissible, right?
mhm, mhm,
Up until now, you know, nothing is different. Now comes the question of, okay, what kind of policies can you issue if you're a
mhm,
mutual company invested in what's halal and issuing policies? So when you read the discussions about life insurance, can anyone insure a life? No.
mhm.
Is it
Right.
if I take out a policy that if I die, a certain amount of money goes to my family, am I insuring my life? No. What I'm insuring is a loss of revenue or a loss of income,
Mhm.
right, to pay the debts that I've left behind.
Yes. Mhm.
So call it what you want,
Yeah.
you know, call it you know,
Mhm,
postmortem debt insurance.
mhm,
It's the function of it is what's important. And if it's permissible for me to take my money, invest it over the long term, and have that money paid out on a trigger
mhm,
in my lifetime, it's certainly allowed for me to do that, you know, triggered upon my own death, so that so that my family is
mhm,
not stuck with debt. So I
mhm,
think there's a
mhm,
fundamental misunderstanding. And I'll say this:
mhm,
there is a unhealthy insistence amongst many of the professionals in our community
mhm.
to assume expertise or to assume understanding the intricacies of things that they're not involved in.
Yeah. Mhm,
Just because you have a benefits package through work doesn't mean that you understand. I mean, I've met people that
mhm,
manage defined benefits programs for companies,
mhm,
don't understand the legal documentation that goes behind the cash management,
mhm,
right? So if I'm just paying into a policy and getting money out,
mhm,
that doesn't tell me anything about how the money is managed behind the scenes. It doesn't tell me about what the legal and regulatory structures that support that.
mhm,
And we'll many times have people who are again religiously inclined and somewhat fervent, right?
mhm,
Who will come to someone like myself or yourself
mhm, mhm,
who are working in various areas of expertise and
mhm.
say, "No, you've gone against all of the scholars." Okay, which scholars?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I have
Yeah.
direct
Exactly.
access to them and to their
Right.
works, and
Mhm,
I'm telling you what fits
mhm,
this, you know, this, you know, this area
mhm,
that needs to be addressed in
mhm.
our context. So I
Yeah.
think sometimes it's more of a defense mechanism by some people
Mhm.
than it is like an actual like informed opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and of course, I mean, I don't want to try to make you go down too deep into any particular rabbit holes, you know, because there's a lot of topics. We could actually have like a whole sort of episode just talking about a number of these
Sure.
issues that come up in Islamic finance or just in Buyur in general, you know. But like, yeah, people just most people love black and white answers,
Hmm.
right? And that's what's easy for most people, you know. So even when you teach about riba, you know, it's like, okay, well, what is riba, what's not riba, what's illah, what's the illah for tahrim, you know,
Yeah.
what did the Hanabila, Shafi'i say, what did the Hanafi say, what did the Maliki say, what did the Zahiri say,
Yeah.
right? So so it's there's so much there, just even with respect to riba, for starters. And I remember years ago that I asked one of my teachers in Morocco about automobile insurance and whether or not it was halal, you know. And he said me, and I said that, you know, even if we say insurance as a general category, a thing is haram, couldn't we say that it's halal based upon haja?
Hmm.
And he said no, even the
Hmm.
haja, not haja doesn't validate it either, you know. And inside I would say, well, I just don't agree with that, right? I felt, you know, and I know he was driving the car as well, and I said to myself, well, I wonder if he has insurance on his car, you know, but he's driving the car, but maybe he believes that, but he just pays the insurance because the government demands it of him, right?
Sure.
And you know, and I can understand it. Actually, he's trying to be principled. He has an understanding. This is how he interprets the Sharia itself. But I personally I felt that, okay, well, the nature of life is so different for us today that, I mean, people didn't drive around on these very dangerous vehicles that we have today. Of course, I mean, a horse is pretty dangerous, right? A horse
Hmm.
and wagon can be pretty dangerous as well, you know. But you know, you look at the speeds and, you know, the potential harm that, you know, comes within the type of, you know, pricing we have on the repairs, and, you know, and how do you repair your body, you know. And I just kind of feel like, okay, well, people should have the capacity to actually repair things if they break them in these vehicles, you know. And that in itself just in other words, I sort of feel like automobile insurance is not, it's permissible but not as a rukhsa. I feel
Hmm.
like it's more like azima, right? It's not even a rukhsa,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
just because the nature of you know, technology and the industry and just the culture on the road itself, right?
Right.
That, you know, I know that's just my thinking on the issue, and I could be wrong, but it's, I just, you know, but I definitely know it's not a black or white answer. Same thing with life insurance. It's like, well, I know it's not black or white, right? But
Right.
most Muslims, unfortunately, we are fed either one opinion or the other.
Yeah.
And, you know, once we see someone expressing the opinion we were told was haram, you know, oh, we have to come out and we have to attack that person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, so you know, when just about insurance policies in general, when you ask
Yeah.
people, okay, well, why is it haram? They don't have an
Mhm.
answer.
Right.
And then maybe somebody will say, well, it's riba. I say, no, if it's investing in riba, no,
Hmm. Right.
it's only investing in what's halal.
Right.
What's the answer? No,
Hmm.
it's still not allowed.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, why is that? I don't know. I'll tell you why. The scholar said, those scholars that you know, that talked about
Hmm.
insurance, they said that's impermissible because of al-gharar
Hmm.
al-fahish, right? So
Hmm.
excessive uncertainty in the contract, which is
Hmm.
why we don't take kind of shareholder-based conventional insurance companies, because those policies are issued to purchase the risk and pay out a payment, right, from a third party that profits off of the money that you give them
Hmm.
for the life of the policy. Whereas a mutual insurance company, right,
Hmm.
is the policy holders issuing the policies to themselves, taking
Hmm.
the money and reinvesting it for the benefit of themselves. So when it becomes a primarily donative, right, as you know, we say, you know, aqd irfaq, right,
Hmm.
or aqd
Yes. Right.
tabarru',
Hmm.
you know, donative contracts, gharar does not apply to them.
Yes. Hmm.
So the
Right.
issues of
Right.
gharar
Hmm.
are, you know, even if you said it was gharar fahish or gharar yasir, you know,
Hmm.
excessive gharar, excessive uncertainty,
Hmm.
moderate uncertainty, or light uncertainty, in general,
Hmm.
with donative contracts, they don't apply. Even in commutative contracts, muawadat,
Hmm.
that when there is a need that overrides the uncertainty,
Hmm.
then the contract becomes allowed. So
Hmm.
gharar is very much a contextual application,
Right.
and
Hmm.
not a hard fast rule. I mean, there is attempts to quantify it. Myself, I've tried to kind of like create formulas and all of that stuff, right? To make it easier, but to understand. But it still is very much, context specific. And I think
Mhm.
the universalization of fatwa, and this is
Mhm.
another topic, like a really
Mhm.
broad topic, right?
Mhm.
Is a very modern, I think, is a very
Yes.
modern
Yeah.
phenomenon. And
Right.
what it's done is that it is simplified. And I would not say it's simplified. It has taken a simplistic approach
Yes.
to very complicated issues,
Yeah.
which has made things actually harder for people
Mhm. Mhm.
because now they're waiting for this, overarching international answer about the ruling of X,
Yeah.
you know, whereas if they had been honed in on their local scholarship who knew the context, they would get an answer very quickly and be able to operate with a certain level of certainty and dedication to Allah in that context.
Mhm.
And it didn't mean that it's necessarily transferable, from California to Texas or from Texas to Florida or Florida to New York. It could be after, a while, right? I mean, Malikiya, you have Kutub al-Amal, right? So
Yeah.
this is
Right.
kind of where
Exactly.
like the fatwa,
Yes. Right.
becomes
That right. Yes.
universalized.
Yes. Right. Mhm.
But I think that there's an unhealthy obsession with thinking that financial systems and financial applications and contexts are the same all over the world. Somebody say Mufti so and so in South Africa said mortgages are XYZ.
Mhm.
Okay, but the mortgage system of South Africa completely different than the US, than
Mhm.
Canada, than Egypt, than Saudi Arabia, than Germany, than
Yeah.
Switzerland, than
Malaysia. Mhm.
Malaysia,
Mhm.
Namibia,
Mhm.
wherever we are in the world. So that
Mhm.
the only thing that I think is should be universal in fatwa are things like Hajj, right?
Yes.
لا يفتي في الحج إلا عطاء.
Mhm.
Amongst the Salaf, you would find that they would have kind of unified because that's what all Muslims are doing at that time. And even then, we have variances, I should say differences, but variances amongst the madhahib, which were still considered acceptable.
Mhm.
Whether, you do mabit in Mina or you don't as a wajib or not,
Mhm.
and
Yes.
you pay
Mhm.
them. Um,
Mhm.
so the oversimplis, this,
Simplification.
yeah,
Oversimplification.
simplification
Yeah.
of these ideas has, I think, actually been a detriment to actual like tadayyun and understanding of what
Mhm.
someone's doing for the sake of Allah, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
even when you're choosing between two things which are bad,
Mhm.
you still have to make an ethical choice and a
Yes.
choice that's informed by your iman.
Mhm.
And when you're simply just waiting for an international answer or
Mhm.
for a universalized answer, you might be doing things without niyyah for years,
Yeah. That,
missing out on ajr or doing something which is ambiguous and thus maybe falling into the haram, like the hadith of An-Nu'man radiyallahu anhu.
yeah, right. 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 Exactly. I mean, probably a perfect example of this from like just politics is the issue of Roe versus Wade. Right. That people, people want to have a uniform law throughout the country, that allows for abortion. And then there are
Mhm.
others, that want to have a universal law throughout the country that actually prohibits abortion, right? Except for in some of them, maybe it's certain exceptions, whatever, things like that. But the Supreme Court sent it back to the states. It became a states' rights issue and say, well, listen, if your state wants to have laws on abortion laws, then you're okay. If your state does not want to have those same laws, you have every right to do what you want, right? Because every state is like an independent country.
Right.
So, and I think that in itself is a perfect solution, right, to the problem, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah,
as long as we're taking into consideration
yeah,
the um the medical advice of properly trained medical providers,
hmm
right?
yeah,
And the liability that underlies that
hmm
is not overly punitive, then yeah,
hmm
I think that's what it needs because it's going to be very different, right? And that's a huge
right,
huge discussion to have.
right,
I mean,
yeah.
but I think that's a very good parallel.
Yeah, yeah. So since you've been back in the U.S., you finished schooling, and of course you've been working and doing different things.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your regular job right now?
My regular job is financial consulting. So I work with a number of individual clients, businesses, and
hmm
nonprofits. in everything from financial planning to debt relief to deal structuring, and just kind of giving feedback on those things, whether it's policy creation, whether it's how to structure and fund a deal that somebody's investing in something, or it's working with individual clients and allowing them to understand better their personal finances. I kind of do that. That's my regular day job, right?
MashaAllah.
That gives me the level of independence to be able to teach online. So like I've been teaching with Zidni Institute out in California. I taught in the past with IOK in SoCal. Our local seminary is called Suhba Seminary. I teach there as well.
Okay.
And I'll be teaching with Mishkah. I'll be doing muamalat with Mishkah this coming semester.
That's great.
And then I also teach with another educational institution here locally, Islamic Financial Literacy. And then I teach with the Islamic Dawah Center, like a once a month educational seminar on different topics. So last
So
time we did
most
like
of this
ikhlas.
online. So most of this
Say again?
online or in person? Most of this work online or in person?
I would say it's 50. I would say the educational stuff is 50-50, right?
Okay.
So a lot of it's in person. Like the Islamic Dawah Center stuff is in person. They post some of the videos online. Suhba's in person. Zidni and Mishkah are online. And in general, the work that I do throughout the week allows me the flexibility to do the educational work and give khutbahs and remain generally detached from institute. Everybody says like, "What's your mosque like? Where's your congregation?" Like, I'm not an imam. I don't have a masjid. I don't have a congregation. I don't do counseling, because that's the follow up that everybody, when you say you're an imam, people think you're an automatic counselor. Probably one of the worst ideas that people have ever come up with.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Not that there aren't imams that aren't qualified, but not
Yeah.
every imam should
I
be
know
a
what you mean.
counselor.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, my professional work gives me the ability to give khutbahs and to teach, which alhamdulillah gives me a level of freedom that, to be able to teach as I want, to work on my PhD with a level of, freedom. And yeah, alhamdulillah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, why don't you talk about that a little bit, Emma? What's your dissertation about, or have you chosen a dissertation topic?
So I have, yes. So
Yeah.
my dissertation is actually on the topic of financial injustice.
Okay. Right.
So
You
I
may
am
mention that.
creating or attempting to create a theory of injustice under Islamic law, and then apply that to financial regulation. So I'm still in the early stages of kind of textual evidence and scholarly understanding of the concept. And then I'll be applying that to a framework that was developed by another scholar on what a nadariya fiqhiyya, like a fiqh theory, is. And I'll take that and then apply it to a couple of different financial regulations from around the world. Right. So this is out of the big three prohibitions in Islam. This is one that I'm just trying to trying to work on and get some color around.
Inshallah, yeah, great, yeah. Actually, I know you've written a short post about reparations. I'm actually writing an article about reparations and Islamic view on reparations.
Oh, mashallah, great.
Yeah, and I was planning to quote you, right, in the because there are not many Muslims, scholars have actually touched on that topic in any particular way, But I'm, I'm maybe about a quarter of the ways done. I'm writing for a journal out of
Okay, great.
Australia. Right. But yeah. So you have this, you're working on your dissertation, of course you have books as well. I know you have the one book on Zakat. You have other books too, right?
I do, yeah. So I have Simple Zakat Guide. And alhamdulillah, we're in this is the 10th year anniversary of that book.
Oh, okay.
The 40 hadith on wealth and earning. That's where I did a selection of 40 hadith, each hadith pertaining to a major issue of personal finance or wealth management. Qadumi's Hanbali Primer, which is basically a translation and annotation of 100 it's the ibadat from Dalil al-Talib, basically, that were summarized by a Palestinian scholar by the name of Musa al-Qadumi. And then I have a number of different articles and entries, a couple of chapters, some chapters on Islamic insurance I've actually written. Another couple of chapters, like one on Uthman Danfodio and the
Mm-hmm.
Sokoto Caliphate. That
Mashallah.
one's I'm very proud of, and that's in the Encyclopedia of African religion. And then the entry on Islam in the Encyclopedia of Latin American religion,
Mm.
and then the number of entries in like Oxford's Encyclopedia of Islamic Law. All about differing things. Most of them actually focusing on my area of expertise, but some of them in more general topics.
Mashallah, tabarakallah. I didn't know about the articles, the peer review articles. So, inshallah, I
Yeah,
looked them
those
up.
are
Yeah.
all up on my academia.edu page if anyone wants to
Okay.
check them out. Like
Okay.
I
Yeah.
put drafts up there that people could easily download them, because we know I really
Mm.
dislike the academic paywalls that are
Mm.
out there, that stop
Yeah.
knowledge from free flow.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, so I have a couple more questions before we close as we wind down. Is there any particular personality, present or past, or contemporaries, recent person, recent past, that you believe that the rest of us should know more about, or someone maybe someone has some influence on your particular journey, who you'd like to share any information about?
Hmm.
Mm,
It's interesting. That's an
mm,
interesting question.
mm,
Um, Especially since, like, when I think about my own personal development,
mm,
right? And I think sometimes the norm for us
mm,
when we go overseas is to like think of the big names and attribute ourselves to the big names.
mhm,
Alhamdulillah, I have been able to meet several major scholars within my lifetime, right? But I would say that the two that I benefited the most from, as
mm,
far as ongoing learning and character development, were my Quran teacher, Sheikh Abdullah ibn Muhammad al-Jarrallah,
mm,
who's head of the Maqarid al-Qurani in Medina now.
mhm,
Um, and and um, and then secondly is Sheikh Ahmed Rashid al-Ruhaili, who I studied
mm,
fiqh with.
mhm,
I would credit those two with, I think, the most
mhm,
the majority of formative work, right?
mhm.
And you can go to other scholars, and it's kind of like after you've been like polished off and honed, by some other scholars, you go and they go, "Wow, it's a great student." It's kind of like,
Mhm.
but
Yeah,
the guys that like put up with me when I was
yeah. Yeah.
when I was rough around the edges, I think
Mhm.
they get the most credit.
Yeah, that's a good
And
point.
they
Yeah.
don't necessarily have like written works or anything like that,
Mhm,
but I credit a lot of just who I am to
mhm.
them.
Alhamdulillah. Allahu
Yeah.
Akbar. Yeah. How can someone follow your work?
So the best thing would be to come to my website, joebradford.net.
Mhm,
So I've been trying to move away from social media. Just
mm,
kind of social media push out things like a beacon, and focus most of my work on a kind of contained community on the
mhm,
website. So there's a community tab that you can link and join for free, and then that's where instead of being on Facebook or Twitter more, I'm on there more discussing things with people. Lots of
mhm,
people who are specialists in their field join, and they're looking for specific answers, or particular. I do traditional classes in fiqh and aqidah, and then I'll do financial classes on there as well. And I think that's the mainstay for me right now. But
mashallah.
joebradford.net is where everything
Mhm,
kind of culminates: the
mhm.
articles, the videos, all that stuff.
Right. You used to have another website, right? We'll see. Did you close that down, or is
No,
that?
no, we still have My Wasiya. Yeah, My
Mhm,
Wasiya is a
mhm,
for-profit. It's a business that I helped found, and
mhm,
that's for Islamic wills here in the United States.
mhm,
You, Jazakallah khair, and we're one of the
mhm,
first to kind of review our
mhm,
our work and give us a sign off. So I really appreciate that from you.
mhm.
Um, and yeah, we still have that, mywasiya.com. Yeah, so that's for anyone looking for an affordable Islamic will that's according to your state's laws. We offer it there.
Inshallah. Well, Sheikh, it really was really enjoyable talking to you. I really do appreciate you taking out the time from your busy schedule to talk to me. And I'm hoping that we can see one another in person very
Inshallah.
soon once
I
again.
hope
And
so as well.
inshallah, any closing comments or recommendations or prayers?
As we close out, just to a general reminder to everyone as we close out the year, just to take some time out and do some muhasabah, do some
Mhm,
muraqabah.
mhm,
Think about how you've spent the year, how the
mhm.
remainder of the year will go, and as the Prophet ﷺ
Yes,
said,
sir.
if you see in the past that this year wasn't very good for me and I got a lot of work to do, alhamdulillah. If you
Mhm,
see that you've done great in and you've got more time to do more, إنما الأعمال بالخواتيم. Actions are
mhm,
judged by the final, by their, the sealing action. So make the end of the year successful, inshallah, full of worship and contemplation of Allah. And may Allah give everyone success in everything that remains of the year, and especially you. Jazakallah khair for having me on.
Inshallah. Barakallah fiqh. Beautiful. Inshallah. Shaykh Joe, really do appreciate it. Inshallah. Until next time. Inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and grant you success and benefit others through your work.
Ameen. You as well.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and support. Check the links in the description below to keep up with our work. Thank you.